to begin this presentation, I will pass it over to Laurel Cadwell. Laurel is the Director of Information Technology Services for Latah County, Idaho. She's held this position since 2008, and she oversees the county use of IT to improve services for the employees and citizens of Latah County. And with that, I will pass it over to Laurel.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I just wanted to mention that I took our keynote speaker's advice to heart, and I put my background as a wonderful beach with sunshine and another small vacation that I can take. For today's breakout session, we are going to have a presentation from Andrew Dolan, who's the Director of Stakeholder Engagement with the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is MS-ISAC, if you know it more from that. He has been with MS-ISAC since 2012, and I first met Andrew, gosh, back in 2013 when I was first inquiring about MS-ISAC and what the resources were that were available for the municipalities. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrew and let him explain more about what is available to our agencies.
Thank you very much, Laurel. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Glad to hear it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Dolan. I am the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for the Multi-State and Elections Infrastructure ISAC. We have had a wonderful partnership with NACo going back for years now. And I've got a unique perspective when it comes to government. I've worked at every single level of government, from federal to state to local. And I can tell you this, local government truly is the front lines. You are the ones the citizens are working with, and you're the ones that they're dealing with more than any other level. It's an important partnership to have, and more importantly though, NACo has a lot of great resources, and they've partnered with the MS-ISAC to provide cybersecurity resources for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments all over the country. I just thank God we've got my title down a little bit. When I first started, my exact title, let's see, it was something along the lines of Director of Government Engagement for the state, local, territorial, and tribal governments for the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center of the Division of the Center for Internet Security, as funded by the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications within the Department of Homeland Security. Whew, it's a mouthful. With all government, you need to have your acronyms and everything else going. But it's an important area that we need to understand, is that we are not alone out there. There are resources everywhere. And unfortunately for us, we have lots and lots of responsibilities. There is a disturbing lack of cybersecurity throughout the government sector, and it is not something that there is fault to be cast here. There is little money for cybersecurity. I think it's less than 10% of an IT budget actually goes to cybersecurity. And there is so much out there, and ransomware has really been the flavor of the last couple years, and it's not going anywhere. There are horror stories out there where we can learn from each other's mistakes, but more importantly, there are folks out there who are here to help. The MS-ISAC, the EIISAC, DHS at a federal level. NACo has resources that you can utilize as well. And even in your own neighborhood, your backyard, your neighbors, your local county, whoever the state contact is as your CISO, there's a lot you can do. Laurel has been a wonderful partner to the MS-ISAC for years, as well as Rita Reynolds within NACo. And I love getting to speak at these conferences because I've had relationships with these folks going back years. And the one thing I promise them is that while there's not a silver bullet for any of these pieces of malware out there, hacktivists, nation states, there are things we can do to better protect ourselves. And they are coming after us because criminals want data. Every bit of data that we have about ourselves has a price tag associated with it, whether it's banking information, social security numbers, passwords, usernames. People want this information and they sell it in batches in the millions. But they're not going to stop. I believe it was the great bank robber, not John Dillinger, but Willie Sutton, who, when he was finally arrested, the FBI brought him in and they go, "Sir, why do you rob banks?" And he looked at them like they were idiots and he goes, "'Cause that's where the money is. And they're going to keep coming after government because we hold our citizens' data." And it's not just the data they're after. There are all parts of our lives that are interconnected with the internet these days, from mass transit to industrial control systems to our general just user experience as an end user working in a government. And many of us out here do not have cybersecurity as our top day-to-day concern. Folks who work in your HR department, folks who work in your revenue department, whatever it might be, these people have their day-to-day jobs and cyber isn't a part of it. So it's up to us. It's up to the people who do cybersecurity, the CISOs, the CIOs, people who work in IT, to really provide whatever help we can to these people, to give them a fighting chance, to make sure that they have a reasonable expectation of safety as they're doing their day-to-day jobs. We've seen ransomware really, really ramp up from this area where, hey, it was going after individuals and it was only costing a couple $100s to unlock your files and get them back. And then we've seen in the past few years, it's gone strategic. Unfortunately for us, they now know that when they can lock these cities and completely disrupt the business continuity and the ability of a government to serve its citizenship, that they can charge almost whatever they want. And we have seen this constantly from the state of Colorado to the city of Atlanta, and even going back. Today, we are going to touch on not only some of the true horror stories that affected government. It is October, Halloween's coming up. So we are going to use that as our theme today. For any of you folks out there who might watch Stranger Things, it can seem like the upside down sometimes, but there is help available. And we are going to show you how to access that help and also what to be on the lookout for. Not just resources you can take advantage of from different organizations, but simple best practices that you yourselves can take advantage of. And these, we need to continue to evolve as the good guys, as the defenders, because the bad guys are evolving. It used to be very, very easy to look at a phishing email and know that it was written by somebody who didn't speak English as a first language. The Nigerian prince was having trouble accessing his fortune. He just needed your help. But they have become more sophisticated. They know our calendars. They know what is going to get our attention. First of all, they will actually go in and they will spoof email addresses, names, anything else to make you think it's coming from somebody in your own organization to try to trick you. They'll actually use LinkedIn and target new employees who might not be comfortable enough to ask questions or to question it if they get an email from who they think is the boss, knowing that it's probably better for them to respond right away. But our attackers are taking advantage of this. We had an old president, and Ben Spear, my colleague, who's the director for the Elections Infrastructure ISAC, will be speaking later today. We worked and we actually had one that hit our HR department looking for W-2 information for individuals in our own company. And it was written to our HR director. With every bit of information on there looked like it was from our COO, a gentleman who spent a lot of his life in the military. And she actually, and it's this human intelligence, we can be our own best advocates. Because she looked at it and she goes, all right, I know Steve. Steve was in the Army for 20 years. He does not use punctuation or capital letters. And this entire email is written absolutely perfectly. And that kind of tipped her off. And sure enough, it wasn't from Steve. But they understand how to get us now. They know that those W-2 scams are coming out and they are using them between January and February because that's when we get them. They know that when they send out those spoofed emails from the UPS and FedEx saying, hey, click here to track your package, that they do this between Black Friday and Christmas because that's the time that we are most likely to have a package being delivered to us. And they will use all forms of deceit and anything they can use, from social engineering to brute force to whatever it is, to get into your information. but there are a lot of things that we can do to help. Number one is patch and update. No matter what type of cybersecurity solutions you're using, flashiest lights, the loudest bells and whistles, patching and updating is the number one thing that you can do, because many pieces of malware can't even deploy if you're running a fully patched and updated system. Two, create a culture where it's okay to ask. Be more carrot than stick. Go to your employees, give them advice, let them know they can come to you, encourage them to forward suspicious emails to the IT departments, just to have them look at it. It's a great thing we can do, because we have to create a culture where it's okay to make mistakes. And we have to train our employees to make sure that they have the fighting chance to recognize the threats that are out there. And there are all different types of resources that we can use to combat these. NoMoreRansom.org is a great resource for dealing with ransomware. Your own state or state police, or even your state CISO's office, can be a valuable resource as well. There are various different types of things out there, and we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of what the newest ones are, because the malware isn't going anywhere. We are seeing all different types coming across our radar this summer. But as you can see here, the top ones don't change. Drydex, Zeus, all this different types of malware are out there. Zeus is an old one. Zeus has been around forever, but it's effective, and it goes after banking credentials. And it's one of the reasons that it continues to be used. As you can see here, Schlayer, Zeus, Cerber, basically these are all different types of ransomware. And we don't need to get into the details, but what we are going to do is talk about some of the ways that you can protect yourself, some of the things to look for, and most importantly, knowing the vector that these types of malware are infiltrating our networks through. Malspam, malvertisement is definitely some of the areas that we've seen jump, but there is not really a perfect defense for a perfectly crafted phishing email. You know, if they try you, and the problem is the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right 100% of the time as we're doing this. And they only need one mistake to get in. And they take advantage of it. And they will use anything they can, whether it's the phishing emails, but they will also use targeted pieces of malware to go after end-of-life software and hardware. A lot of the different types of huge breaches we've seen have come because people are not updating. They aren't making the financial commitment years ahead of time to know that they are going to have to migrate to an entirely new operating system or replace servers. There was an enormous police department on the East Coast that had a breach that was entirely caused by the fact that they were running Windows XP way after it had gone end of life. And they did not want to hear that, hey, listen, the ISAC cert can come in and we can help you get cleaned up, but you're just going to be infected again tomorrow. Until you make this commitment, there is not much that we can do. And as with all different types of things, they go after current events. They will use COVID-19 and the coronavirus to come after us and to try to spoof emails, because they know that we want this information and that we are going to click without thinking. And that is one of the things that they really want to get us on. They want to put something that is so shocking into the body of their email that you respond or you click without even thinking. One of our old coworkers used to work for the state of New York, and they actually did a phishing attack within their department that busted like 75% of the state workers in his department. And he was told he could no longer do phishing exercises. It was way too effective. And you know what he did? It was New York State. It was right after Governor Patterson had taken over, and he sent out an email saying, New York Times confirms Governor Patterson approves a 4-day work week for all state employees. Nobody gave a second look to anything on there. Everybody just said, I've got a 4-day weekend for the rest of my career. And that's all they looked at. But they're going to try all different types of things. A huge malware campaign was going on a few years ago linked to the royal wedding because they knew people wanted to know about it. But from what we see in government, they're going to try to get into our payroll systems. They're going to try to access HR for W-2s. They want to know people who are doing wire transfers because they want to find what they can get away with and what they can actually do before we even realize that our network has been breached. There is a disturbing amount of time that goes by between the time an attacker has compromised your network and by the time that security realizes that there is an attacker present there. But again, there's things that we can do. Develop a culture where it's okay to ask, where it's okay to make these mistakes, and where people aren't being ostracized for what they think might be stupid questions. You know, work with your PR, HR, legal, finance teams, and make sure that you are not using admin accounts for everybody. Even if you're a small county or city, you know, make sure that the admin accounts are tightly locked down. We see these cybersecurity hackers as, you know, these dark geniuses who are sitting in a tiny basement room with hundreds of monitors in front of them, genius level intellect. But that's not reality. That's more of a myth. Many times these folks are simply criminals who have found a really, really easy way to make money. There are folks out there all the time. The Bitcoin Baron was one going around years ago. He was attacking police departments all over the country, and he was claiming, I am a crusader for social justice. I will not rest while these police departments are violating civil rights. I'm going after them. And he took down San Marcos, Texas. And San Marcos, Texas said, well, we agree with you. You said we had a suspect die in an officer's custody and that you weren't going to let us do business until that officer was held responsible. Well, we thought the same thing. That's why that officer went to trial, was found guilty, and is serving his sentence 2 years ago. This guy is just browsing anything he can, looking for vulnerable governments to victimize. And he crossed the line. This crusader for social justice actually started going after Shriners Children's Hospitals, trying to steal the personally identifiable information of terminally sick children. And apparently that's a no-no even in the hacker community. He was turned in by a tweet that was sent to the FBI and the Arizona Department of Public Safety that said, the Bitcoin Baron is Randall Charles Tucker. You will find him in Scottsdale, Arizona. The house is owned by his mother. Randall will be in the basement. And sure enough, they found him and also found that he had stabbed his father earlier in life. And this crusader of social justice basically was an idiot who was using online tools that you can rent and point at any IP address you want. And we have to make sure that we are doing our due diligence, that we are not making the simple mistakes. Make sure we're patching and updating. You know, don't leave passwords and usernames written down places that are public in your office. Lock them up. If you have to, write them down, put them somewhere locked. Even our own federal government has had issues with this. Thankfully, this was a one-time thing. I like to imagine it was changed very quickly. But it was the first of its kind Cyber Command Center. It was Super Bowl 2016, Peyton Manning's last Super Bowl. It was in Santa Clara, California. And they did a live look-in. And sure enough, somebody had the username and password for the billion people watching the Super Bowl up on the screen as they did their live look-in. And it can happen to even royalty. This was years and years ago now. It was Prince William's first time in the Royal Air Force. He had joined his comrades. He was at a base, and they had taken a picture. It was one of the most liked photos on Facebook. It had millions of likes within the first couple hours until somebody in British intelligence said, what is that up behind the prince? And zooming in, you find out it's the administrative username and password for the Royal Air Force's radar system. Not something you necessarily want on Facebook. And these are actually coming into a point in time now where we have to begin dealing with ransomware in a much more serious way. And we have made steps in the last 5 years that we have never made before. We are not alone in this, and we are actually getting better. It might seem like an uphill battle, but we are improving. And this was an area where we saw folks really cross the line. One of the things that even in our own backyards that really gets us upset is when something actually threatens human safety. And this Los Angeles, technically it was the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, had to pay $17,000 to unlock their systems. They had no backups. They were jeopardized because a third-party vendor that had a VPN connection to the hospital was using a horribly out-of-date server. The third party was jeopardized. They used that tunnel to get into the hospital and locked everything. This put human life at risk. Surgeries were canceled. Patients had to be moved. Dosages and prescriptions couldn't be looked up. And it was something that we had not seen before. And it happens even where you think it might not. For any of us who go, okay, hey, listen, at least the criminals who might do this are in prison. Well, something to be said for our vocational programs in our state and local correctional facilities. This was the state of Ohio, and they had two wonderful vocational programs called Networking and Cabling for Beginners. As you might be able to tell from the slide in front of you, didn't really go great. They were able to find an open port to access the state correctional network above the ceiling tiles, and were able to plug in and begin to access anything they wanted, even while in prison. The guards came back, the day staff who came back from the weekend noticed that the internet traffic had jumped something like 500%. And they started looking, and all of a sudden, all the searches are how to make guns in prison, how to make drugs in prison, and so much pornography you would not believe. I like to think a few years later, they would have also been tipped off when the Amazon drones started delivering packages into the yard. But this type of thing is an area where we have to be on the lookout for, because insider threat, it was, as our keynote speaker said earlier today, we don't think about the janitor being part of cybersecurity, but it is. Access is the first thing people need, whether it's remote or in person. And it can be remote. This was one of the worst data breaches we have ever seen at a state level. It happened back in 2012, and 8 years later, the state of South Carolina is still dealing with the financial repercussions for this. They lost the W-2s of 3.7 million people. There are only 4.6 million people in South Carolina. And I think that the million that they didn't get were probably dependents whose information was listed on those other W-2s. It was a simple phishing email. They used a keylogger once they had been in to get a username and password that they could access the Department of Revenue's server where these W-2s were being stored. And 2 weeks later, they were for sale on the Russian underground. And this, a more lighthearted one in the spirit of Halloween. Great Falls, Montana, right up in Laurel's neck of the woods. It was back then where a couple of kids found that they had a tool called Shodan, or the Sentient Hyper Optimized Data Access Network. The name means nothing. It's taken from a 1980s Atari video game where an artificial intelligence was trying to take over the world. But what Shodan can do is Shodan can actually go and look for IP addresses connected to the internet. They can sort and filter by what they want to see. And these kids from over in Europe were experimenting and trying to see what different types of outside the box internet connections were public facing. And they found an emergency alert system in Great Falls, Montana. They got the model name, the company that made it, the vendor, all the details they needed, and they called and they socially engineered an employee of that government to give them the username and password so they could do a remote patch and make sure that the EIS system was still functioning correctly. They then used this to launch the zombie apocalypse. The bodies of the dead are rising from their graves and attacking the living. They warned the folks in Montana not to approach or apprehend these bodies as they should be considered extremely dangerous. Thankfully, the people in Montana realized this for what it was. It was a hoax. And they had some fun with it. Came on right during morning in the middle of the day. But it went across TV, radio. It got picked up in 4 other states before this was able to put a stop to it. But the point is, this is Pandora's box. Our citizenship, our constituency, they trust us to give them information. They trust their government to hold their information and to provide the absolute most secure environment we can. But there are mistakes that will be made. And this was one of them. If you don't need something public facing, don't put the internet connection out there. You know, these kids were found and it was a hoax. But what if that was a major metropolitan area? And they said, you know, say New York City, and they said that there was a chemical or biological attack on the subway or the mass transit system. That's Pandora's box. If that message goes out for even seconds across that emergency alert system, there is going to be riots, panicking, mass exodus from the city. And that is a message that even if you run a, you know, basically a saying it didn't happen, you know, a trying to correct yourself, it doesn't matter. Once the message is out, it's out there. But we are not alone. And as CIS and the MSISAC, our first president and the founder of the MSISAC, a gentleman by the name of Will Pelgrin, who still sits on our board, says we are stronger together. There is MSISAC resources and EIISAC resources that you can take advantage of. Security benchmarks, where you can actually have completely consensus-based security benchmarks for whatever operating system or server you might be running, knowing how to harden your systems in the best way possible. We have a CERT that will provide incident response assistance for any incident you might be the victim of, ransomware or anything else. We have training resources. We will monitor your IPs and domains. We have scripts that will go out and search websites looking for posted credentials of government employees and let you know that you might have a person or an employee whose credentials are publicly out on the internet. There is so much out there and so much you can take advantage of that we want to make sure that you know what there is. And the CISA resources. CISA has fantastic resources for local governments, from information, public information and educational information, to where they will actually come in and they will run cyber resilience reviews. You can actually schedule to have a cybersecurity advisor come to your local government and do an assessment of your entire cybersecurity posture and how you're doing. And they'll give you a report when you're done, and they'll do it for free. There's also the malicious domain and blocking report that the MSISAC is doing in partnership with CISA. And this is one of the best ways to combat phishing. There is so much here. I don't even have time to scratch the surface of all of it. But for those of you looking to learn more, there's a great resource called the Federal Virtual Training Environment, or FedVTE. As long as you have a government email address, you can access over 1,000 hours of cybersecurity training, from best practices to CISSP prep courses, from beginner to expert. And they have things that you can just take on demand. And as long as you have a government email address or are a veteran of our armed services, you can take advantage of these services for free. And we are here to help. The MSISAC and EIISAC runs a security operations center that is staffed 24/7, 365 days a year. Nights, weekends, I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, New Year's Day, you are going to have someone who will be there to help. And if you're not already a member, I encourage you to join. There is no cost to join the EIISAC if you're involved with elections, or the multi-state ISAC. We don't ask anything. There are terms and conditions and that you have to accept to become a member, but there is no cost. And if you're finding it's not for you, there is no pressure to attain a member. But I am proud to say that I have been a member and an employee of the ISAC and CIS for 8 years this month. And we have never lost a member because we provide help, and the price ain't bad. I used to have an old boss who said, if it's free, it's for me. But we are here to help. And for all of you out there who might be struggling to make sure that you're as prepared as you can for the election next month, I encourage you and strongly encourage you to stay on the line for the rest of this wonderful conference sponsored by NACo, and to listen to my colleague Ben Spear speak later about digital elections and what the MSISAC can do and what you can do to be better prepared. And with that, thank you all for having me here today. It was wonderful to speak with you. I hope you found this, if not entertaining, listening to some of the horror stories, at least informative. And with that, I know there's only a minute or two left in this session, but I'll open things up if anyone in the audience has a question or two before we conclude. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. I can attest that from my county, we have subscribed to several of the offerings from ISAC, and it has been extremely helpful. One of them is the Athenian project with the elections security, and that significantly reduced the amount of traffic hitting our network just
Glad
by
to hear it, Laurel.
participating in that. Are there any other questions? Well, with that, we will see you guys all in the main session. You have to jump back over. And
I'll be joining as well.
the link is
Everyone.
in the chat box in this session right here to jump back to the main session.
Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, see ya.